Nobody tells you that some of the worst rooms in your life are usually the nicest looking ones. 41st floor, glass on 3 sides, and a view of Manhattan that real estate agents describe using words like unparalleled and aspirational. I'd sat in that particular conference room maybe 200 times across 3 years, always on the same side of the table, always as the +1 who got a chair, but never a vote. That morning, I sat there for the last time. Welcome to Endless BL Stories Besties. This is our very first video, and we're so excited to have you here. We're building a family for everyone who loves emotional BL romances, unforgettable characters, slow burns, enemies to lovers, and happy endings you can't stop thinking about. If that sounds like your kind of story, hit the subscribe button, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Now grab your favorite snack, get comfortable, and let's dive into today's story. The folder landed on the table between us, and 3 photographs slid out of it, like they'd been waiting the whole elevator ride up to make their escape. Old ones. A gala from our first year together, both of us laughing at something cropped out of frame. A birthday. A quiet Sunday. Nobody but the 2 of us was supposed to have documented at all. Julian Kingston stood over me and watched the way a man watches a slot machine he's already lost a fortune to, hoping this time the numbers line up different. I looked down at the papers. Termination of partnership, personal and professional. A severance figure that would have made the man who used to live in this body weep with relief 3 years ago, back when relief was still a currency he traded in regularly. I picked up the pen from the tray beside the folder. Is this the part where I'm meant to ask you to reconsider? I asked, uncapping it. Something crossed his face. Surprise, maybe, or the early stages of it. The way weather shows up on the horizon before it actually reaches you. Elliot. Because I've read it twice already. I found the signature line. It's thorough. Somebody on your legal team earns their paycheck. I signed. My handwriting came out narrower than the one this body used to make. Less looping. More like a man writing a grocery list than a man writing his own ending. I didn't know if that would matter to a court somewhere. I decided it wasn't my problem to solve that particular morning. I slid the folder back across the table. Julian didn't take it right away. He just looked at me the way you look at a hinge you were certain would stick, and instead swung open without a sound. That's it? He asked. You want me to cry first? I can step out and come back in if the timing's an issue. 2 junior associates near the window did an admirable job pretending they hadn't heard that. I stood, buttoned my coat, and left the room without checking whether he watched me go. He did. I could feel his attention between my shoulder blades the whole walk to the elevator, but it landed somewhere with no nerve endings left to register it. Let me explain, because I know how strange this sounds. I'm not Elliot Voss. Not the real one, anyway. Not the man whose memories arrived in my head the morning I woke up in this body, sorted and labeled like a filing cabinet somebody else had spent years organizing. In whatever life I had before this one, I was a nobody with an unremarkable job and unremarkable hours, and then I wasn't anything at all, and then I opened my eyes in a penthouse bathroom with someone else's face in the mirror and someone else's ache lodged behind my ribs. Except the ache wasn't mine. I want to be clear about that part. It came stapled to the memories. Sure, every humiliation, every quiet devastation this man endured across 3 years of loving Julian Kingston. But somewhere between his last heartbreak and my first morning behind his eyes, the feeling itself evaporated. What I inherited was the record of it. The receipts, not the debt. So when Julian threw dissolution papers at a man he'd loved, he was aiming for someone who'd flinch. He hit someone standing very still, reading a stranger's diary with mild professional interest. I've thought about why that particular arrangement, his memories, my absence of feeling, happened to land on me specifically, and I've never found an answer that satisfies me. Maybe there isn't one. Maybe whatever moves souls between one life and the next doesn't leave a forwarding address for questions like that. I stopped chasing the explanation around week 2 and started focusing on the parts of this arrangement I could actually do something about. The memories tell it to me like this. A night 11 months back, snow instead of rain, boxes instead of a formal announcement. Julian didn't come himself. He sent his assistant Priscilla with a checklist and a face arranged into practiced neutrality, and 6 movers who carried Elliot's things out of the penthouse he'd shared with a man he thought he'd marry. Elliot stood in the lobby and watched. He told himself he'd be composed about it. He lasted 4 minutes. A wooden box hit the pavement outside, the one holding pressed flowers from the botanical garden where Julian took him on their second date, back when Julian still showed up early to things and laughed with his whole face, instead of the practiced half of it he wore for cameras. The box cracked. The flowers, 3 years dried and fragile as moth wings, crumbled into a color that used to be violet. A small music box slid out of another crate. Brass, the size of a fist, shaped like a wren with its wings folded. A gift from the very start, back when Julian was still trying, before trying became a thing he only did in front of an audience. It landed wrong. The lid snapped clean off. Nobody apologized. The movers had a schedule to keep. Elliot sat on the curb in 12-degree weather until a girl from building maintenance, young, new, still learning which residents got acknowledged and which got walked past, came out with a spare blanket from the lost and found bin and draped it over his shoulders without a word. That kindness, the memories tell me, broke something in him more completely than the eviction itself. I think about that girl more than I think about Julian. I don't know her name. I hope somebody's been kind to her since. 3 months after the papers, 3 months into wearing a stranger's grief, like a coat 2 sizes too big. I live in a studio above a bakery in Astoria that Elliot's severance check paid for outright, cash, no landlord games. It's smaller than the penthouse's coat closet. I like it considerably more. There's a heater with a rattle in the fan blade I fixed myself. Second week in, with a screwdriver and 40 minutes of patience I didn't know this body had until I gave it the chance. There's a mug with a hairline crack down one side, glued with the kind of 2-part epoxy you buy at a hardware store, and it holds tea just fine. And I find the crack more interesting than any of the unbroken porcelain Julian's family kept in glass cabinets nobody was allowed to open casually. There's a candle on the windowsill that carries a faint hint of cedar because I found a bundle of shavings at a farmer's stand and figured out how to melt them into a spare block of wax. Small, unnecessary, mine. There's a blanket I hemmed myself when the edge started to fray. Uneven stitches that would embarrass a home ec teacher, but hold up fine against a queen's winter. I've replaced almost everything the original Elliot lost with something plainer and sturdier, and every single object in this room exists because I chose it, which is a freedom he apparently never got to feel in 3 years of choosing Julian Kingston over and over without anyone choosing him back in the same way. My mother calls on a Sunday evening back in Ohio and asks the same question she's asked every week since the breakup made its way into her orbit through a cousin who follows too many gossip accounts. "Are you eating?" she asks, which is her way of asking everything else. "I'm eating fine, Mom." "You sound different." I pause on that one longer than I mean to. Different how? Steadier, I don't know, like something finally settled. A beat, the sound of a spoon against a pan somewhere on her end. "Your father wants to know if you're coming home for the holidays." "I might. I've got a lot going on out here." "You always do, sweetheart." She doesn't push, which is a mercy I don't think the original Elliot ever fully appreciated while he had it. Just take care of yourself. That's all I ask. I tell her I will, and for once, I believe it when I say it. Julian starts showing up outside my building around week 4. The first time, he knocks 11 times, waits a beat, knocks again, like the door might respond differently to a different rhythm. I'm not going to open it. I sit at the little table by the window with a library book on urban beekeeping, a subject I picked purely because it was the first spine that caught my eye at the branch 2 blocks over, and I let his knuckles do their work against the wood while I read about swarm behavior. "I know you're up there," he calls eventually, loud enough that Mrs. Alvarez 2 floors down probably hears it through her vents. I am aware. I don't answer. "I only want to talk." He says some version of that 6 separate times over 20 minutes. The first time, it comes out with the full weight of a man used to getting compliance the moment he asks for it. By the 6th, the weight's mostly gone, worn thin, the way confidence does, when nothing confirms it back. Around the 15-minute mark, he adds a new word to the rotation. "Please." I note it the way you'd note a change in barometric pressure, mildly, without much personal investment. I finish the chapter on hive relocation. I make tea in the cracked mug. Eventually the knocking stops, and I hear him sit down against the wall outside my door, the specific quiet thud of a very well-tailored coat meeting a hallway floor that hasn't been mopped since the Clinton administration. I don't go check on him. It isn't cruelty. I've simply run out of any obligation to. He comes back the following week, and the week after that, always announcing himself the same careful way, always leaving without forcing the issue past what my silence has already made clear. Something about the consistency of it starts to needle at a curiosity I hadn't expected to develop. I don't act on the curiosity. I just note it, filed away next to everything else I'm choosing not to feel yet. Downstairs, the bakery belongs to a man named Theo Park, 26, perpetually flour-dusted, the kind of person who narrates his own baking process out loud to nobody in particular because the silence of a 4 a.m. kitchen apparently gets to him. We meet the week I move in, when I come down looking for coffee, and instead get handed a burnt cinnamon roll and an apology for it being burnt. "Rent's brutal up there, huh?" he says, watching me eat it anyway. "It has character. That's what people say about apartments with mice. No mice yet. Give it time." He laughs. A real one, unguarded, the kind of laugh I never once catch in 3 months of Julian's memories. And something about how easily it comes out of him settles a little of the static in my chest. Theo becomes the fixed point of my week without either of us deciding on it formally. He leaves the ovens running low for me on nights I come down after a long walk. I fix the wobble in his walk-in freezer door with a shim of folded cardboard, a temporary patch that somehow lasts 3 weeks before he finally lets me install a proper hinge. We don't perform friendship at each other. We just have it, the way you have weather. He's the first person since the Transmigration who asks me a question about myself and actually waits for the answer instead of already composing his rebuttal. "You seem, I don't know, different than the guy who used to live in the fancy building," he says one night, kneading dough with the kind of aggression that suggests it did something to him personally. "Different how?" "Steadier." He glances up. "The one time I met you before, this was maybe a year ago, you came in for croissants with the Kingston guy. You looked like somebody who was constantly bracing for weather. And now you look like the weather already happened and you're doing inventory." I think about that for a long moment, longer than the observation probably warranted. That's accurate, actually. He doesn't push. That's the other thing about Theo. He hands you the truth and then lets you carry it at your own pace. Over the following weeks, I learn things about him the way you learn a neighborhood, gradually, in fragments, until one day you realize you know all its shortcuts. His parents run a bakery back in Fullerton, California, and he apprenticed there until his older sister took it over, at which point he came east, chasing a version of the same trade that belonged entirely to him. He's been engaged once, briefly, to a man who decided at the last minute he wasn't built for a life that smelled permanently of yeast and 4 a.m. alarms. He doesn't talk about it often. When he does, there's no bitterness in it, just the particular clarity of someone who's made peace with a door closing so a different one could stay open. "You ever think about opening your own place?" I ask him one night, elbow deep in flour myself, having been recruited into folding croissant dough with instructions I'm executing with the enthusiasm of a man who genuinely enjoys learning things with his hands now that he has the time to. Every day. Rent around here for a second storefront's a joke, though. I file that thought away, too, the way I've started filing most things lately, not with any particular urgency, just the quiet habit of a person keeping an inventory of possibilities. A basket arrives on a Wednesday. I remember because Wednesday is when the bakery gets its flour delivery, and the truck was still idling outside when the courier climbed the stairs with a crate wrapped in tissue paper, heavy enough to double as a blanket. From Mr. Kingston, the card reads, in handwriting, too careful to be his own. Inside, a roasted chicken from a restaurant with a 3-month wait list, a tin of loose-leaf tea shipped from somewhere in the UK, a box of the same chocolate truffles Elliot's memories associate with their 2nd anniversary. I look at it the way you'd look at a word problem you already suspect is rigged. The original Elliot's memories carry a very specific fear around gifts like this. Not that Julian would ever poison him, nothing that dramatic, but the older, quieter fear of accepting something from a hand that's already shown you it can decide, unilaterally, what you deserve and when you stop deserving it. Once you eat from that hand enough times, you forget you're allowed to feed yourself. I have no interest in relearning that particular forgetting. I carry the whole crate down to the bakery. Theo's icing a batch of cardamom buns when I set it on the counter. Compliments of my ex, I tell him. Split it with the regulars. I'm making rice. You're turning down a chicken that probably has its own publicist? I didn't ask for it. I'd rather eat something I chose. He studies me for a second, then shrugs and starts unwrapping the tissue paper, like Christmas came early. Your funeral, or not funeral, your loss. Wrong phrase. I laugh, actual and unforced, and go find the rice. Julian is standing across the street when I step outside 20 minutes later with a takeout container of plain rice and grilled vegetables from the corner stand. I catch him mid-step back into the shadow of the awning, like he'd been hoping I wouldn't notice, though the coat gives him away from half a block off. Nobody else on this street owns wool that particular shade of charcoal. I don't cross to talk to him. I eat standing at the bus stop 40 feet away, in full view, and let him watch a man be entirely fine without him. He doesn't send another basket after that. Small mercies. Here's where the story stops being just a heartbreak and turns into something with teeth. 3 weeks in, going through a box of the original Elliot's work files. He'd been an archivist for the Kingston Family Foundation, cataloging decades of charitable donation records, a job that came bundled with the relationship the way a rental car comes bundled with a hotel package. I find a spreadsheet he'd flagged and never mentioned to anyone. Donation records to 3 different scholarship funds. Numbers that don't reconcile. Grant disbursements logged as paid that never left the foundation's account, going back 6 years, funneled instead into a shell entity registered to Julian's uncle, Grant Kingston, the foundation's CFO, a man the memories describe as the family's favorite because he's the only one who ever remembers everyone's birthday. Elliot found this 11 months ago, flagged 4-line items in a private note to self-document, saved it to a personal drive, and never told a soul. Because 2 weeks later, the arranged partnership announcement dropped, Julian's family suddenly pushing him toward a merger with Desmond Cho, heir to the Cho hospitality empire, and Elliot got quietly, thoroughly excised from every room that mattered. He assumed it was simple heartbreak, timing, bad luck. I don't think it was luck at all. I sit with the spreadsheet until the cedar candle burns down to a stub, running the same instinct that used to guide me through spreadsheets in whatever unremarkable job I had, in whatever unremarkable life came before this one. The pattern's too clean to be an accident. Someone with access scrubbed the paper trail everywhere, except this one personal file Elliot never backed up to the shared server. Which means somebody wanted him gone before he connected the last dot. And the fastest, quietest way to remove an archivist who stumbled into your books is to remove the relationship that gives him a reason to stay close to the family. I don't say any of this to Julian. Not yet. I want to know exactly how deep it runs before I hand anyone a reason to bury it faster. I spend the following 2 weeks quietly rebuilding the trail from scratch, cross-referencing what I remember of the foundation's filing structure against public tax records anybody can pull with enough patience. It's slow, careful work, the kind that rewards the specific competence of somebody who spent an entire previous life doing something unglamorous and precise. I find I don't mind the hours it takes. There's a particular satisfaction in watching a pattern surface out of noise. The way rice softens in a pot if you leave it exactly long enough and not a minute more. Around the same time, I start noticing a car. Nothing dramatic. A dark sedan parked half a block from the bakery on 2 separate mornings. A man in a plain jacket reading a newspaper outside the community garden fence on a 3rd. It could be nothing. New York's full of men reading newspapers outside fences. But the original Elliot's memories carry a familiarity with exactly this kind of quiet surveillance. The Kingston family's security detail has a habit of hovering at the edges of things they'd rather not be seen hovering over, and something about the particular stillness of the man's posture matches that memory precisely. I mention it to Theo, carefully, over the walk-in freezer's new hinge. You think somebody's watching you? I think somebody might be watching to see what I do with something I haven't done anything with yet. He doesn't ask what that something is. He just says, use the back stairs for a while, and leaves it there, which is exactly the kind of low-key, unbothered support I've come to expect from him and have started, without quite meaning to, relying on. I start varying my routine after that. Different route to the garden some mornings. A different corner store for the rice. Nothing paranoid, just careful. The kind of careful a person gets when they've spent an entire other lifetime learning that the people with the most to hide are usually the ones who notice first when somebody starts looking too closely. I take the spreadsheet to Priya Nandakumar, a business reporter Elliot's memories know only vaguely. A woman he sat next to at a foundation gala once, traded 3 sentences with about the seating chart. Nothing more. I find her through the paper's tip line, meet her at a diner 2 neighborhoods over where nobody photographs anybody, and slide 4 years of numbers across a table sticky with syrup. I need you to tell me if I'm seeing a pattern or just being paranoid, I say. She reads for 11 straight minutes without touching her coffee, which I take as an answer before she gives me one. Where do you get foundation internal ledgers? I used to work there before some things happened. The Kingston breakup. She doesn't phrase it as a question. Everyone in this city apparently read the gossip column that ran the week the papers got signed. This is either nothing, or it's the kind of thing that gets people's licenses pulled. She taps the 4th flagged entry, this one especially. If the disbursement date's real and the receiving account's real, that's not creative accounting. That's theft from a scholarship fund for foster kids. Something in my chest does a thing I don't entirely expect. Not the flat, distant registering I've gotten used to, but something closer to actual heat. Turns out there are things this body still lets me feel when the target's worth it. What do you need from me to run it clean? I ask. Time. Confirmation from at least one more internal source. And ideally, she looks up, somebody inside the family willing to go on record eventually once it's airtight. So this doesn't collapse into a he said, she said. I think of Julian sitting against a hallway wall for 20 minutes with nothing left in his voice but please. I might know somebody, I say. We meet twice more over the following month, always at the same diner, always with fresh syrup on the table. Nobody bothers cleaning. The second meeting comes with a complication. 2 of the 4 flagged disbursements have vanished from the version of the ledger. Priya manages to pull through a records request, replaced with cleaner, corrected entries that make it look like the discrepancy was simply an early bookkeeping error, already caught and fixed internally. Somebody's cleaning up behind you, Priya tells me, jaw tight in a way that has nothing to do with any phrase I need to avoid using and everything to do with real frustration, which means somebody knows you're looking. I think of the sedan, the man with the newspaper. I've got the originals. I tell her, Elliot, I backed up copies to a drive nobody at the foundation knows exists. If they're editing the shared system, that just proves the tampering happened after the fact. Her expression shifts into something like respect. You're better at this than most sources I work with. I used to be good with numbers in a different life. She doesn't ask what I mean by that. Reporters, I'm learning, know better than most people when a question isn't actually meant to be answered. Grant Kingston finds me himself eventually on a bench outside the community garden on an otherwise unremarkable afternoon, wearing the kind of easy, avuncular smile the memories tell me has charmed 3 generations of Kingston family gatherings. Elliot. He says it warmly, like we're old friends catching up, rather than a man who might be cornering someone he suspects is about to end his career. Mind if I sit? He sits before I answer, which tells me plenty about how this conversation's going to go. I hear you've been asking around about foundation finances, he says, still smiling, still pleasant, the tone of a man discussing the weather. I'm allowed to be curious about an organization I used to work for. Of course you are. He studies the crocuses along the fence for a moment. I also hear you've been meeting with a reporter, Priya Nandakumar. Sharp woman. Bit of a bulldog, though, once she gets a story between her teeth. I don't confirm or deny it. I just wait. The way I've gotten good at waiting for people to reveal exactly how much they know by how hard they try to sound like they don't need to ask. I want to be direct with you, he continues, when I offer nothing back. Whatever discrepancies you think you found, they're old, they're resolved, and dragging them into the papers now would do considerably more damage to people who don't deserve it than it would to me. My mother, for one. Julian, for another. A pause. Waited deliberately. You still care what happens to Julian. I know you do. This would hurt him. You embezzled from a scholarship fund for foster children, I say evenly. And you're asking me to protect your reputation by pointing at collateral damage to people you're the one actually endangering. His smile doesn't waver, but something behind his eyes goes very still. I'd hate for this to get unpleasant, Elliot. Is that a threat? It's a caution from someone who's fond of you, believe it or not, even now. He stands, brushes an invisible speck from his coat. Think about what you actually want out of dragging this into daylight. Whatever it is, I promise you there are quieter ways to get it. He leaves without waiting for a response. The same unhurried, confident walk the memories associate with every Kingston family gathering he's ever presided over. I sit on the bench a long while after he's gone, watching the crocuses do their slow, patient work of opening. I think about foster kids who never got the scholarships they were promised. I think about a boy who sat in the rain with a box of ruined flowers and never once thought to ask whether the family he loved was worth protecting at the cost of his own dignity. I call Priya that evening and tell her to run it the moment she has one more confirmed source. Desmond Cho, it turns out, is nothing like the rival the original Elliot's anxious memories painted him as. I find him, or rather Theo's cousin, who works event security at the Cho Regency, sets up a coincidental run-in outside a coffee shop because I ask nicely and Theo's family apparently runs on the same currency of quiet, lateral favors this whole story keeps circling back to. Desmond's maybe 32, dry as good bourbon, and the first thing he says to me, unprompted, over an overpriced oat milk latte, is, "You should know I've been trying to get out of this arrangement since the ink dried. I gathered you weren't thrilled. I have a partner. Marcus runs the kitchen at a place in Chelsea. My family knows the marriage talk is theater. Mine wants the merger, Julian's wants the optics. And somewhere in the negotiating, nobody stopped to ask either of us. He studies me over the rim of his cup. You're taking this considerably better than I expected. I got an upgrade on feelings a few months back. Comes with a strange kind of clarity." He laughs. Doesn't ask what that means, which I appreciate. And when I bring up the scholarship fund numbers, his face changes entirely. Grant Kingston handled our joint gala sponsorship last spring. I always thought the accounting on that felt off. Nobody could ever get me a straight answer on where the surplus went. He sets his cup down. "I'll talk to your reporter. On record. I've got no reason left to protect that family's optics." Non-cliché twist number one quietly delivered. The rival was never a rival at all. He was just another person the Kingstons had already spent, the same way they'd spent Elliot. Desmond invites me to dinner the following week, insists it's the least he owes me for the introduction to Priya, and I end up at a table in Chelsea across from him and Marcus both, a broad-shouldered, quiet man with flour permanently under his fingernails. Not unlike Theo in that particular regard, who spends most of the meal listening more than talking, and somehow still manages to be the funniest person at the table with a single, well-timed sentence dropped in every 20 minutes. He does this, Desmond tells me, fond and exasperated in equal measure, says nothing for an hour, then ends the whole conversation with one line, and everybody just has to sit with it. Efficient, I say. Efficient, Marcus agrees. And doesn't elaborate, and the whole table laughs anyway. It's the first dinner since the Transmigration where I catch myself laughing without calculating at first. Without the small internal audit I usually run to figure out whether a feeling's actually mine or just an echo of something Elliot used to feel in rooms like this. This one's mine. I decide to let it stay that way. The morning walk is the one habit I keep from before, though I've changed the route. Every day, out past the bakery, down through the community garden 3 blocks over where somebody's been coaxing crocuses out of frozen dirt since February, along the fence line where a family of sparrows has started nesting in a gap in the brick. I like routine. It gives the day a shape the rest of my life currently lacks. Julian intercepts me on a Sunday. Not that the day carries any weight. It's simply the next one after Saturday, doing its quiet work of being itself. He's standing at the corner where the garden path splits, hands in his coat pockets, doing a poor job of looking like he arrived there by accident. I slow. I don't stop. He falls into step. I've been thinking. Congratulations. He exhales, recalibrating the way he does now every time I decline to hand him the reaction he prepared for, about how things were handled, the move out, the winter. The crocuses along the fence are just starting to split open, purple at the edges where the petal hasn't caught the light yet. I make a note to come back and watch them fully open. You handled it poorly, I say, plainly, because it's simply accurate, and accuracy doesn't require decoration. Yes. I have nothing else to add there. Yes is a whole sentence on its own. Is that all you're going to give me? There's an edge in his voice now, not anger, something rarer, without a clean name for it. I want to talk about the Foundation's donor ledgers, I say instead, specifically the scholarship disbursements your uncle's been managing since 2020. He stops walking entirely. I take 3 more steps before I turn back to face him. In the flat, gray morning light, I watch every rehearsed word he came here with fall apart behind his eyes. What? I'm not talking about us, Julian. I'm talking about 4 grant payments logged as sent that never left the Foundation's account. I'm talking about why I got quietly walked out of every room that mattered 11 days after I flagged the 3rd one. The color drains out of his face by degrees, like a tide going the wrong way. That isn't possible. My uncle wouldn't. I have the spreadsheet. I have a reporter double-checking it against source documents this week. I have Desmond Cho on record confirming irregular accounting on last spring's joint gala. I let that land. Watch each piece hit him fresh. Your uncle already came to warn me off. He offered me a quieter way to get what I want, whatever that was supposed to mean. You should sit down with your grandmother before this runs. She deserves to hear it from family before she reads it in the paper. He looks at me like the ground under him has quietly rearranged itself without asking permission first. He came to you, directly, on a bench. Very pleasant about it, too. Practically avuncular, Julian's hands curl into fists at his sides, and for the first time since the papers landed on that boardroom table, I watch something in him crack open that isn't performance and isn't calculation, just plain, uncomplicated fury on somebody else's behalf. He threatened you. He cautioned me. There's a difference, apparently, if you're the one doing the cautioning. Elliot, why are you telling me this? He asks instead, voice gone thin. After everything. Because you didn't do it, I say. And because the boy who used to live in this body loved your grandmother almost as much as he loved you, and she's about to find out somebody she trusted has been stealing from foster kids for 6 years. Somebody should soften that for her. It isn't going to be me. I turn and walk on toward the sparrow's nest without looking back to see what his face is doing with that. The fallout takes 11 days to fully surface, and Priya's story runs with 3 confirmed sources, 17 pages of financial documentation, and a quote from Desmond Cho that reads, "In full." I withdrew from the proposed partnership the moment I understood what it was actually covering for. Grant Kingston resigns from the Foundation board the same morning the story goes live. A resignation letter full of phrases like stepping back to spend time with family that fools absolutely nobody. He also, according to a source close to the family that Priya declines to name even to me, threatens legal action against the paper for defamation, a threat that dissolves within 48 hours once his own lawyers see the backup files I'd kept off the shared server, time stamped weeks before anything in the ledger ever got quietly corrected. The scholarship fund gets restored in full within the week, plus interest, plus a public apology from Eleanor Kingston, Julian's grandmother, the family matriarch, that reads less like PR and more like a woman genuinely furious at having been lied to by someone she'd trusted since he was a boy. She asks to meet me. I almost decline out of some instinct left over from Elliot's memories that says nothing good ever comes from being summoned to a Kingston family conversation, but curiosity wins out. We meet at a tea room near the Foundation's offices, and she's smaller than I expected, sharper too, with a way of looking at a person that suggests she's already read 3 chapters ahead of whatever they're about to say. You could have sold this story for considerably more than the satisfaction of watching my nephew squirm, she tells me, without preamble, once the tea's poured. A tabloid would have paid handsomely for it. I wasn't interested in money. I gathered that eventually. It took me longer than it should have. She studies me over the rim of her cup, the exact gesture Julian does when he's deciding how much of himself to show. My family did you a serious disservice, Mr. Voss. I'd like to make some part of that right, if you'll let me. You don't owe me anything. I disagree, but I'll respect the boundary. She sets her cup down. Julian's told me a little about the shop you're building, the bakery, the bookstore. I'd like to send business your way, quietly, no strings attached, if you'd allow an old woman that small kindness. I think about it for a long moment. Word of mouth's fine. I don't want the Kingston name attached to the storefront. She smiles at that, genuine, a little rueful. No, I imagine you wouldn't. A pause. He's different, you know, since all this. I don't say that to build a case for him. Just observation from someone who's watched him his whole life. I've noticed some of that myself. That's more than I expected you to admit. She finishes her tea. Take your time with him, whatever you decide. He's earned the wait, if nothing else. Julian shows up eventually, on an evening with no particular significance attached to it, carrying something small, wrapped in brown paper, his face arranged into an expression I've never once caught in Elliot's memories. Hope sitting directly next to something closer to fear, with no attempt made to hide either. I meet him at the bottom of the stairs instead of making him climb up and knock against a door I won't open. I know what's in the paper, I tell him, before he can start. He stops. It's the wren, isn't it? You had a jeweler recreate it. His mouth opens, then closes. How? You're not subtle. You never really have been, underneath all that boardroom polish. He holds the package out anyway, hands not quite steady. I had them work from a photograph. I know it isn't the same one. I know that isn't how any of this works. I don't take it. Keep it, I say, gently, because there's no version of this conversation that benefits from cruelty, and I've got no interest in being cruel to a man who just watched his own family betray him from the inside. Not as a punishment, just keep it, give it to somebody it can still mean something to. There isn't anybody else, he says, and his voice comes apart on the last word. Not dramatically, just the sound of something that's been holding a shape under pressure and finally can't anymore. I know, I tell him. I'm sorry about that. Genuinely. And I am. There's a man standing on a stoop in Astoria, holding a brass bird wrapped in paper, having just spent 11 days watching half his family implode, and none of it is performance anymore. That's simply sad. Not my sadness to carry, but sad. That isn't enough, he says. Sorry, it isn't enough. No, I agree. It isn't. It's what I've got, though. I step back up toward the stairs. Behind me, I hear him stay exactly where he is for a long moment before his footsteps finally head off down the block, slower than they came. Spring arrives properly in April, and with it, an idea Theo and I have been circling for weeks, without either of us saying it out loud first. The empty storefront 2 doors down from the bakery, vacant since the shoe repair shop that used to occupy it closed during the pandemic, has been sitting there collecting dust and a for lease sign nobody's called about in months. Books and coffee, Theo says one night, flour on his eyebrow from an incident with the mixer he refuses to explain. You've got the eye for fixing things up. I've got a baker's dozen of recipes nobody in this borough's tried yet. I don't have any capital. You've got a severance check you haven't touched, and a knack for reading spreadsheets that just took down a foundation board member. I think you'll figure the capital part out. I laugh, and something settles into place that I don't examine too closely, because examining it might scare it off. We sign the lease in May. I spend 3 weeks stripping decades of shoe glue residue off the floorboards myself, sanding them down to something honest and imperfect, the way I've come to prefer everything in this new life. Theo builds shelving out of reclaimed lumber from a demo job his cousin's crew was tearing out uptown. We name it after the only thing either of us could agree on without an argument. Wren and wheat. I keep the broken porcelain mug on the counter, the one with the epoxy scar down its side, and it becomes something close to a mascot without either of us planning it that way. The setback comes in June, 2 weeks before our planned opening, When the city's health inspector flags our secondhand oven for a ventilation issue, neither the previous tenant's paperwork nor our contractor caught in time. Fixing it properly means new ductwork, a permit we don't have the runway to expedite, and a delay that threatens to push our opening into July at the earliest, right as our lease's grace period on rent runs out. I spend 2 sleepless nights running numbers, the old instinct kicking in hard, trying to find a version of the budget that survives the setback without gutting the shop before it's even opened. It's Theo's regulars who solve it, in the end, in a way neither of us saw coming. A contractor who's been getting his morning coffee from the bakery for 2 years turns out to specialize in exactly this kind of ventilation retrofit. And he does the job at cost, over a single weekend because, in his own words, "You fixed my kid's bike chain free of charge back in February and never once mentioned it to me till your friend here let it slip." I didn't remember doing that. Elliot's memories don't carry it either. It must have been something the version of me who's been living quietly in this neighborhood for months did without registering it as anything worth cataloging. Small, lateral kindness, I tell Theo, once the ductwork's finally passed inspection. Turns out it comes back around, sometimes. That a philosophy now? Working theory. We open on a Saturday in July. No fanfare, no press, just a hand-painted sign in the window and a stack of second-hand books. Theo and I spent a full weekend organizing by a system that makes sense to exactly nobody but us. Mrs. Alvarez from my building is the first customer through the door. Priya shows up an hour later with a stack of business cards for the paper's culture desk, insisting she's not writing a puff piece, just supporting a friend, though I notice her taking careful notes the whole time anyway. Julian comes by as a customer, nothing more, and orders a coffee from Theo like a stranger who wandered in off the street and sits by the window with a paperback for 90 minutes without once trying to catch my eye. I bring him a slice of the cardamom bun anyway, unasked. On the house, I tell him. New menu item. You get to be the test subject. He looks up at me with an expression careful enough that I can tell he's rationing his own hope on purpose now, doling it out in amounts small enough not to hurt if it goes nowhere. "Thank you," he says, and it comes out steadier than anything he said to me in nearly a year. I don't sit down with him, but I don't walk away immediately either. I stand by the table a beat longer than the job strictly requires, and something about that small, deliberate extra second seems to land on him the way a much bigger gesture used to fail to. We build something new across the following months, slower than either of us is entirely comfortable with, which is probably exactly the right pace for 2 men who both learned, the hard way, what happens when things move too fast for anyone to notice the cracks forming underneath. He comes by twice a week, then 3 times, always as a customer first, a friend second, nothing else offered or assumed. He learns Theo's name and Theo's cousin's name, and eventually starts showing up with actual questions about the shop's supply chain instead of questions about me, which I find, against every instinct I've cultivated since waking up in this body, genuinely disarming. There's a scare in August. A photographer catches the 2 of us on the sidewalk outside the shop, nothing more than a shared laugh over a delivery gone sideways, and, by that evening, it's already circulating with a caption that assumes considerably more than what actually happened. Julian calls apologetic, offering to have his family's PR team issue a statement clarifying that nothing's happened between us, that I've got no obligation to be dragged back into public speculation over a coincidence. I sit with the offer a long moment. "Don't," I tell him finally. "You don't want the clarification. I don't want a statement that pretends nothing's happening, because something might be. I'd rather let it stay ambiguous than lie about it in either direction." A pause. "Let people wonder. I've got no interest in managing anyone's narrative anymore, including my own." The quiet on his end of the line stretches long enough that I almost think the call dropped. "Okay," he says eventually. "Okay, whatever pace you want this at, I'll match it." It's the first time in the whole story that he's offered me control over the shape of something between us instead of a fully formed plan for how it should go. I notice the shift. I don't say so out loud, but I notice it. In October, he asks if I want to walk to the garden with him on a Sunday, and I say yes, and we watch the last of the season's asters going over together without either of us needing to fill the silence with anything at all. Somewhere around the fence line, near the sparrow's nest, empty now, its residents long since moved on for the season, he takes my hand, carefully, like he expects me to step back the way I have every time before. I don't. You're allowed to say if this is too soon, he tells me, low, careful with every word, like each one costs him something to spend. It probably is, I admit. I'm choosing it anyway. He looks at me for a long moment, and something in his face finally settles into a version of itself I recognize from the earliest, kindest fragments of Elliot's memories, before the family, before the boardrooms, before either of us had reason to armor up against the other. He leans in slowly enough that I have every chance to step away. I don't do that either. The kiss is quick and a little uncertain and entirely unlike the choreographed, photographed affection Elliot's memories carry from 3 years of a relationship built for an audience. This one has no audience. It's just two men standing by a fence in a community garden in Queens, getting something small and real exactly right for the first time. When we pull apart, he's smiling in a way I've genuinely never once seen on him before, nothing practiced in it at all. For what it's worth, he tells me, voice unsteady in a way I've come to recognize as entirely genuine on him now. I don't need this to look like anything it isn't. I just want whatever it actually is. That's a good place to start, I tell him, and mean it. By December, the Wren sits on the shelf behind the register at Wren and Wheat, brass wings still folded, a small crack repaired along one seam with the same 2-part epoxy I used on the old mug. Julian brought it back himself finally, once there was somebody it could actually mean something to again. Eleanor Kingston stops by, unannounced one afternoon in the same month, buys 3 books she has no intention of reading purely to support the shop, and leaves a note tucked into one of them that I don't find until closing, addressed to nobody in particular. Some things end because someone wins and someone loses. Some things simply get the chance to begin again, differently, when the people in them decide to let them. I'm glad this one did. I show it to Julian that evening. He reads it twice, quiet, and folds it carefully back into the book like something worth keeping. He still runs Kingston Hospitality, reformed now, audited, his grandmother back at the helm of the foundation with a board she personally vetted twice over. He works long hours. So do I. Neither of us is in a hurry to fold our whole lives into the other's the way Elliot once tried to and lost himself doing it. But most evenings, once the last customer's cleared out and Theo's locking up the ovens downstairs, Julian shows up at the shop with 2 coffees he actually makes himself now, badly, and we sit together in the window seat and watch the block go quiet for the night. It isn't the life the original Elliot pictured for himself 3 years ago, full of galas and matching monogrammed everything. It's smaller than that, steadier, built out of things we chose on purpose, one at a time, the way you rebuild anything worth keeping. It's enough. It's more than enough. It's, in fact, everything. The end.